either for offering sacrifices or for cooking. But a sannyasi is freed from these two responsibilities. He does not have to cook or offer fire for sacrifice because he is always engaged in Krishna consciousness. Therefore, he has already accomplished all ritualistic performances of religion. Aniketana means without lodging. He should not have his own house, but should depend completely on the Supreme Lord for his food and lodging. He should travel. Mona means silent. Unless one becomes silent, he cannot think completely about the pastimes and activities of the Lord. And I'm sorry, he cannot think quickly. He cannot think completely about the pastimes and activities of the Lord. It is not that because one is a fool and cannot speak nicely, he therefore takes the vow of Mona. Rather, one becomes silent so that people will not disturb him. It is said by Chanakya Pandita that a rascal appears very intelligent as long as he does not speak. But speaking is the test, a so-called silence of a silent impersonalist. Swami indicates that he has nothing to say. He simply wants to beg. But the silence adopted by Kardama Muni was not like that. He became silent for relief from nonsensical talk. One is called a Muni when he remains grave and does not talk nonsense. Maharaja Ambarisha set a very good example. Whenever he spoke about the pastimes of the Lord. Mona necessitates refraining from, Mona meaning silence, necessitates refraining from nonsensical talking and engaging the talking facility in the pastimes of the Lord. In that way, one can chant and hear about the Lord in order to perfect his life. Vratam means that one should take a vow, as explained in Bhagavad Gita. Amanitvam adamitvam, without hankering for material respect and without being proud of one's material possession. Ahimsa means not being violent. There are 18 processes for attaining knowledge and perfection, and by his vow, Kardama Muni adopted all the principles of self-realization. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Okay, so let me just read the verse again, text 42. The sage Kardama accepted silence as a vow in order to think of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and take shelter of him exclusively. Without association, he traveled over the surface of the globe as a sannyasi, devoid of any relationship with fire or shelter. Yeah, meaning he just became an itinerant monk, not staying more than 1 or 2 days anywhere, and not seeking a shelter. Okay, so Prabhupada says in his purport, a sannyasi should be completely detached from fire and any residential quarters. A grihasta has a relationship with fire, either for offering sacrifices or for cooking. But a sannyasi is freed from these two responsibilities. He does not have to cook or offer fire for sacrifice because he is always engaged in Krishna consciousness. Therefore, he has already accomplished all ritualistic performances of religion. Ani Ketana means without lodging. He should not have his own house, but should depend completely on the Supreme Lord for his food and lodging. He should travel. Okay, so uh, we see today there are some sannyasis to actually do that, but there are a lot of sannyasis that have not really understood this principle and have houses and servants and so forth, preparing their food and living very comfortably. But here it says, aniketana means without lodging. He should not have his own house, but should depend completely on the Supreme Lord for his food and lodging. He should travel. Well, Prabhupada gave that example of traveling. He went around the world 14 times, traveling and preaching in his old age. So he gave an example of what a sannyasi should do. At one time, some uh, devotees tried to take over the movement, and they sequestered Prabhupada. In other words, uh, tried kept them locked up in a room, and it was Tamal Krishna Maharaj who went uh, to Los Angeles and freed Prabhupada from being sequestered in a room and took him back to India. And the devotees that did that, who were trying to take over the movement, uh, Prabhupada made them uh, sannyasis and told them, now you just keep traveling and don't stay in one place and cause trouble. And it worked. So, uh, yeah, a sannyasi should not be attached to one place or have a big building or a house or anything like that. He should be an itinerant monk. In other words, always going from one place to another and not staying more than 3 or 4 days in one place. And that's why in this purport it says, Hare Krishna, it says a sannyasi should be completely detached from fire and any residential quarters. Well, fire means, either performing sacrifices or cooking food. A grihasta has a relationship with fire, either for offering sacrifices or for cooking. But a sannyasi is freed from these two responsibilities. He does not have to cook or offer fire for sacrifice because he is always engaged in Krishna consciousness. Therefore, he has already accomplished all ritualistic performances of religion. Aniketana means without lodging. He should not have his own house, but should depend completely on the Supreme Lord for his food and lodging. He should travel. Now, travel means that you go from one, let's say, temple to another temple, or one place to another place, and preach. You're always preaching the principles of Krishna consciousness. That's the main, let's say, vocation of a sannyasi. He's a preacher, and he's an itinerant preacher, going from one place to another and not staying more than 3 days in one place so that he doesn't become attached. And actually, it's a very good life for a sannyasi because he's able to contact many people by doing that. And A sannyasi does not have to cook or offer fire for sacrifice because he's always engaged in Krishna consciousness. Therefore, he has already accomplished all ritualistic performances of religion. And aniketana means without lodging. He should not have his own house, but should depend completely on the Supreme Lord for his food and lodging. He should travel. So that is the life of a genuine sannyasi. Okay, and Prabhupada mentions Mona. Mona means silence. Unless one becomes silent, he cannot think completely about the pastimes and activities of the Lord. It is not that because one is a fool. It is not that because one is a fool and cannot speak nicely, he therefore takes the vow of Mona. Rather, one becomes silent so that people will not disturb him. It is said by Chanakya Pandita that a rascal appears very intelligent as long as he does not speak. But speaking is the test. The so-called silence of a silent impersonalist, Swami, indicates that he has nothing to say. He simply wants to beg. But the silence adopted by Kardama Muni was not like that. He became silent for relief from nonsensical talk. Uh, Though sometimes there's nonsensical talk going on amongst devotees also. So one is called a Muni when he remains grave and does not talk nonsense. Maharaja Ambarisha set a very good example. Whenever he spoke about the pastimes of the Lord. Mona necessitates refraining from nonsensical talking and engaging the talking facility in the pastimes of the Lord. In that way, one can chant and hear about the Lord in order to perfect his life. So, if people are talking nonsense all around you, what should you do? Chant Hare Krishna out loud. Now you're not exactly hearing what the nonsense is, but you're uh, chanting Hare Krishna so other people can be benefited. Chanting a little bit loudly so that other people can be benefited. Mona necessitates refraining from nonsensical talking and engaging the talking facility in the pastimes of the Lord. So Mona Vrata means that you uh, remain silent. But the actual meaning is you don't speak any nonsense. You only speak about Krishna. That is real Mona. The Mayavadis, they take a vow of Mona, Rata. So they'll remain silent. Like one time there was this one, uh, there was this one sannyasi that I knew. He took a vow of silence, right? So whenever he would come, he would remain silent. And when he was eating, when he was, we gave him prasadam, uh, he never said, this or that, right? He always uh, made some gestures with his hands when he wanted something, right? So he'd always be going like this and like that, with his hands, because he didn't want to speak, right? That, of course, is nonsense. So, Vrata means that one should take a vow as explained in Bhagavad Gita, Amanit Vamadamit one, without hankering for personal respect and without being proud of one's material possession and one's material position. Ahimsa, meaning the vow uh, of not being violent. There are 18 processes for attaining knowledge and perfection, and by his vow, Kardama Muni adopted all the principles of self-realization. Well, yeah, there are a lot of principles of self-realization, and but the some of the most important ones are ahimsa, not being violent, either in physically or in and speaking to others. One should be always very humble and meek. Uh, and one should not be hankering for personal respect and without being proud of one's material position. That is, uh, okay, so here it says vratam means that one should take a vow as explained in Bhagavad Gita, aman, amanitvam, adamitvam, without hankering for personal respect and without being proud of one's material position. Ahimsa means not being violent. There are 18 processes for attaining knowledge and perfection. And by his vow, Kardama Muni adopted all the principles of self-realization. So that's what we should do also. Adopt the vow of 18 processes for attaining knowledge and perfection. And by a vow, Kardama Muni adopted all the principles of self-realization. Well, the first two principles of self-realization are hearing and chanting. Hearing about Krishna and chanting the glories of Krishna. So, and that is the function of the ear and the tongue. The ear hears and the tongue repeats, or the tongue vibrates, uh, vibrates knowledge about Krishna. So this hearing and repeating is the life of the devotee. We hear the knowledge of Krishna consciousness and repeat it for the benefit of others also. Okay, so let me see if there's something else in this very good verse. Of course, we're on Canto 3, chapter 24, verse 42. The sage Kardama accepted silence as a vow in order to think of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and take shelter of him exclusively. Without association, he traveled over the surface of the globe as a sannyasi, devoid of any relationship with fire or shelter. Okay, so women are not supposed to become sannyasi, and but men can become sannyasis. However, women can live like a sannyasi. That means they stay in one place; they're not traveling all over the world, but they're always chanting and following the principles of Krishna consciousness. Why is it not recommended for women to become like a sannyasi, traveling all over the world? Because women need to be protected. And when they're not protected, then they can be harmed, sometimes even killed. So it's better to follow the principles that a woman should follow if one has the body of. And men, they can travel and preach more or less as much as they want, but at least they have the chance of protecting themselves. But it's much more difficult for women to be traveling alone, and how can they protect themselves when there are men that can overpower them rather easily? Okay, so let me talk a little bit more about Mona. Mona means silent. So unless one becomes silent, he cannot think completely about the pastimes and activities of the Lord. It is not that because one is a fool and cannot speak nicely, he therefore takes a vow of Mona. Rather, one becomes silent so that people will not disturb him. It is said by Chanakya Pandita, that a rascal appears very intelligent as long as he does not speak. But speaking is the test. The so-called silence of a silent impersonalist Swami indicates that he has nothing to say. He simply wants to beg. But the silence adopted by Kardama Muni was not like that. He became silent for relief from nonsensical talk. Yeah, so when you're in a group of people and they're talking nonsense, best thing is to remain silent, not engage in that type of talk. One is called a Muni when he remains grave, meaning very serious, and does not talk nonsense. Maharaj Ambarish set a very good example. Whenever he spoke about the pastimes of the Lord. Mona necessitates refraining from nonsensical talking. So when you take a vow of Mona, of silence, it doesn't mean that you never say anything. It means that you never talk nonsense. That's the real meaning of it. And engaging the talking facility in the pastimes of the Lord. So basically, you are maintaining monavrata by always talking about Krishna and not talking about anything mundane. So we should, and it says here, vratam means that one should take a vow, as explained in Bhagavad Gita, amanitvam adamitvam, which means not hankering for personal respect and without being proud of one's material position. And then ahimsa means not being violent. So there's so many processes for attaining knowledge and perfection. And by his vow, Kardama adopted all the principles of self-realization. So this verse says, the sage Kardama accepted silence as a vow in order to think of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and take shelter of him exclusively. Without association, he traveled over the surface of the globe as a sannyasi devoid of any relationship with fire or shelter. Well, when you take a vow of silence, it means actually you don't talk nonsense. You only talk about Krishna and Krishna consciousness. That's a real vow of silence. Now, the Mayavadis, they take the vow of silence or monavrata, where they don't talk at all. They don't say anything. And they're oftentimes glorified. So someone will say, oh, this sannyasi, he didn't speak for 10 years. Didn't say one word. So that's not the real vow of monavrata or silence. The real vow of silence is not to talk any nonsense, but always talk about Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So there was this one sannyasi. He made a vow that he would never talk when he's eating prasadam. Right? So when he was eating prasadam, whenever he wanted something, he'd go like this, with his arm like this, signifying he needed something. He would never say anything. And of course, that's nonsense. Uh, the vow of silence should be not to talk any nonsense, but you can always talk about Krishna. Okay. So there are different things that we should do for advancing in Krishna consciousness. And it says here that there are 18 processes for attaining knowledge and perfection. And by his vow, Kardama Muni adopted all the principles of self-realization. Well, the first two are uh, to basically always chant Hare Krishna and Always think of Krishna. I'm sorry. Always think of Krishna and never forget Krishna. If you follow those principles, then you're actually following all the principles of Krishna consciousness. Always uh, talk about Krishna and always remember Krishna and never forget Krishna. That is the two principles that encompasses all the other principles. Always remember Krishna, never forget Krishna. Okay, are there any questions about this verse?
In this case, Prabhupada is probably referring to the, um, the 13th chapter, 8 to 12, right now, like Amanatvam, Madambitvam,
Yeah,
Ahimsa. So that's
those are different principles
of knowledge. Yeah.
of knowledge. Yes. Mhm. Are you looking at it? All 18
Yeah, so I see here on the 13th
chapter of
chapter
Bhagavad Gita.
Bhagavad Gita. It has humility, pridelessness, non-violence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching a bona fide spiritual master, cleanliness, steadiness, self-control, renunciation of the objects of sense gratification, absence of false ego, the perception of the evil of birth, death, old age, disease, detachment, freedom from entanglement with children, wife, home, and the rest, even-mindedness amid pleasant and unpleasant events, constant and unalloyed devotion to Lord Krishna, aspiring to live in a solitary place, detachment from the general mass of people, accepting the importance of self-realization, and the philosophical search for the absolute truth.
Okay. So you're reading from what, the 10th canto? Not
The 13th canto, 8th to, sorry, 13th chapter, 8th to 12th.
yeah. Okay, 13th chapter. I'm sorry. Yeah. All right, very good. So this Amanishvam Adamitvam means without hankering for personal respect and without being proud of one's material position. Very important. Not hankering for personal respect and without being proud of one's material position. And ahimsa, of course, means not being violent. So Prabhupada mentions these 3 out of 18 because they're most important. But eventually, a devotee should follow all 18 principles of self-realization. So it says here, there are 18 processes for attaining knowledge and perfection. And by his vow, Kardama Muni adopted all the principles of self-realization. But uh, you can follow 2 basic principles. Always remember Krishna, never forget Krishna. Right? If you do that, all the other principles will be achieved also. Always remember Krishna, never forget Krishna. So, are there any questions about Canto 3, chapter 24, verse 42? If not, then we'll go on to verse 43. And verse 43 says, Mano Brahmani Yunjano Yat Sad Asata Param Guna Vabhase Viguna Eka Bhakyan Ubhavite. He, meaning Kardama Muni, fixed his mind upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Param Brahman, who is beyond cause and effect, who manifests the 3 modes of material nature, who is beyond those 3 modes, and who is perceived only through unfailing devotional service. Very nice verse. He fixed his mind upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead. para Brahman, who is beyond cause and effect. Okay, now that's a very interesting statement. Beyond cause and effect. That means that he doesn't commit any. It doesn't have any negative qualities, hankering for something, and uh, lamenting for something. I mean, no, I'm sorry. This uh, hankering for something means that you want something, and lamenting when you don't have something. So he's free of that type of hankering and desiring, and not hankering, hankering and lamenting. That is the life of materialistic people. They're always hankering, desiring, and when they don't have those things or lose those things, they uh, begin to, uh, you know, what's said, hankering and lamenting. So that's the life of a materialist, hankering and lamenting. The life of a devotee is serving and glorifying the Lord. The life of a materialist is hankering and lamenting. So there's a big difference between the two. They're hankering something they don't have, and they're lamenting for something that they lost. Okay? Whereas a devotee is always engaged in hearing and chanting about the glories of the Lord, not hankering and lamenting. There's nothing to lament about when one is a devotee because he knows how to chant Hare Krishna. But when a person doesn't know how to chant Hare Krishna and doesn't chant Hare Krishna, then there's many reasons why they're desiring something and lamenting for something they lost. You see, um, the devotees. It's just let's put it like this: when devotees engage in chanting Hare Krishna and chanting ecstatically, they're no longer hankering or lamenting because now they're full of bliss. And chanting Hare Krishna and preaching about Krishna, that's their life. That's their vocation. That's their culture, right? So there's no room for lamenting. You lament when you have something that you're attached to and you lose it. You begin to lament. But if we're always preaching and chanting and taking prasadam, you're not really lamenting because you're connected to Krishna. When a person is not connected to Krishna, then there's many reasons to hanker, to have something, and many reasons for lamenting after losing something. So unfortunately, the life of materialists is hankering and lamenting, and the life of a devotee is chanting and dancing. So there's a big difference between the two. Okay. Uh, of course, the devotees also, so when it says, amanit vamadamidvan, without hankering for personal respect and without being proud of one's material position. And then ahimsa means not being violent. So there are 18 processes for attaining knowledge and perfection. And by his vow, Kardama Muni adopted all the principles of self-realization. But here Prabhupada specifically mentions amanit vamadamitman, without hankering for personal respect and without being proud of one's material position. So those are the first two, amanit vamadamitman, ahimsa, santir arjavam, and so forth, are the 18. But the first two are very important, without hankering for personal respect and without being proud of one's material position. That should be our culture. And of course, ahimsa, not being violent. Okay, are there any questions about this verse, text 42? So this monavrata, silent. Unless one becomes silent, he cannot think completely about the pastimes and activities of the Lord. It is not that because one is a fool and cannot speak nicely, he therefore takes a vow of mona. Rather, one becomes silent so that people will not disturb him. It is said by Chanakya Pandita that a rascal appears very intelligent as long as he does not speak. But speaking is the test. The so-called silence of a silent impersonalist, Swami, indicates that he has nothing to say. He simply wants to beg. But the silence adopted by Kardama Muni was not like that. He became silent for relief from nonsensical talk. One is called a Muni when he remains grave and does not talk nonsense. So this is real science. You become silent and grave when people are talking nonsense. So Maharaj Ambarish set a very good example. Whenever he spoke about the pastimes of the Lord. That's what a real devotee does. This silence or mona necessitates refraining from nonsensical talking. It doesn't mean you remain silent. It means you don't speak any nonsense. You refrain from nonsensical talking and engaging in the talking facility in the pastimes of the Lord. In that way, one can chant and hear about the Lord in order to perfect his life. So, you know, kids that in school, even from early age and right up to, their college days, most of the time, when they're not in class, they start talking nonsense. Yeah, they might talk a little bit about their studies, but most of the time it's all nonsense. And they get all excited talking about this nonsense or that nonsense. Right? They're not going from one class to the other class talking about Krishna consciousness. They go from one class to the other class talking complete nonsense. Okay. Yes.
This is very instructive here to to understand. If talking is about Krishna is right, even though they have taken the Manavrata. It's like very instructive.
Well, yeah, because then you are silent. You're not speaking nonsense. You're only speaking about Krishna. And that should be our culture. We should not unnecessarily talk nonsense. Just talk about Krishna. And if you don't have anything to say about Krishna, just remain silent. Haribol. Okay, text 43. He fixed his mind upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Parabrahman, who is beyond cause and effect, who manifests the three modes of material nature, who is beyond those three modes, and who is perceived only through unfailing devotional service. So the three modes of material nature are when you yeah the mode of goodness and the mode of passion and the mode of ignorance. So those are three modes of material nature. So when one is beyond, goodness, passion, and ignorance, uh, and who is perceived only through unfailing devotional service. Okay, and that's a very significant statement. When you see a person who's always engaged in devotional service, and when they talk about Krishna. Now you know this is a person who's really serious to help other people and eventually help them go back to Godhead and help himself or herself to go back to Godhead. And such a person is known only through unfailing devotional service. Very important point. You know this person because of their unfailing devotional service. And sometimes people, they will know a person by what that person is always doing. So if that person is always doing nonsense, they know it's a nonsense person. But if it's a devotee who's always engaged in some kind of devotional service and is always talking about Krishna, then they're known to be a real devotee. So here it says that this idea of being silent is not refraining from speaking. It's not speaking any nonsense. It's only speaking about Krishna and spiritual things. That's actual real silence. And it says, Mona necessitates refraining from nonsensical talking and engaging the talking facility in the pastimes of the Lord. In that way, one can chant and hear about the Lord in order to perfect his life. Okay, so let's say that you're in school and there is recess, right? So all the kids have a chance to relax for about 15 minutes or half an hour. What do they talk about on recess? You have recess in your school. What do they talk about? What's that? Nonsense, yes. And what grade are you in? Second grade. Well, you'll hear the same nonsense even if you get into 10th grade or 12th grade or go to college. As soon as there's a break, they'll talk about nonsense. So to avoid that, you should become a devotee and avoid hearing nonsense. And you can do that by remaining silent, or you can do that by associating with other devotees and talking about Krishna. But when people are talking nonsense, you should just remain silent because then they won't talk to you anymore. They think, oh, that person's, not really a friend. That's why they're remaining silent. Like, for example, there was a Mayavadi, and he wanted to instruct Lord Chaitanya in spirituality. So he spoke for a very long time, and Lord Chaitanya didn't say a word, didn't ask any questions. And then this person said, "Well, you haven't asked any questions. Have you understood everything I said?" And the Lord said, "Well, I didn't understand what you said, but I just, basically, I just listened out of respect, but I didn't understand anything you said." That was like a real insult, but it was said in a nice way. Uh, and then the person said, "Well, if you didn't understand anything I said, maybe you can say something better." And Lord Chaitanya said, "Okay." So then he began to speak Krishna consciousness. So uh, out of respect, he remained silent. because everything that was being said was nonsense, right? Although it sounded like he was very educated, and he was, but he was a Mayavadi. So there was nothing, as you could say, salutary about what he said. It was all nonsense. So the Lord remained silent. And he noticed, the speaker noticed that. So he said, well, maybe you can say something better. And he said, yeah, okay. So then Lord Chaitanya began to preach to him in Krishna consciousness. So remaining silent is good in the company of nonsense people. Then eventually they realize you're not really interested in what they're saying. So, they leave you alone. Okay. It says here that Kardama Muni adopted all the principles of self-realization. Well, the first two principles are chanting and hearing. Chant Hare Krishna and hear about Krishna. So that's the first two principles. Then there are a lot more principles, but if you follow the first two, you're way ahead of everyone else. Always chanting about Krishna and always hearing about Krishna. Shravanam Kirtanam, you Shravanam, you chant about the Lord and you hear about the Lord. That way you're in good company all the time. Okay, so text 43. He fixed his mind upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Param Brahman, who is beyond cause and effect, who manifests the three modes of material nature, who is beyond these three modes, and who is perceived only through unfailing devotional service. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Whenever there is bhakti, there must be three things present: the devotee, the devotion, and the Lord. The devotee, devotion, and the Lord. Without these three, Bhakta, Bhakti, and Bhagavan, there is no meaning to the word Bhakti. Kardama Muni fixed his mind on the Supreme Brahman and realized him through Bhakti, or devotional service. This indicates that he fixed his mind on the personal feature of the Lord, because Bhakti cannot be executed unless one has realization of the personal feature of the absolute truth. Yeah, so let's say you go to a Baha'i temple, right? We've spoken about this before. The first thing that you notice that is very shocking is there's no deity. Even in the Muslim, the Muslim temples, there's no deity, right? There's just some plaque on the wall that points you toward Mecca, and you have to pray in that direction, but there's no picture or anything like that. But these are complete Mayavadis, the Muslims as well as the Baha'is and others. But in a temple, a Krishna conscious temple, they're deities, right? And they're not idols. An idol is something, if you want to see an idol, you go to the library in Bellevue. There's a big statue of Gandhi outside, right? And the birds are pressing stool on it, and every day people are just ignoring it, right? And once a year, they'll come, they light some candle and do some puja, and that's it, right? So that's an idol, right? But a deity is different. First of all, you never put deities outside. They should always be protected. And just like, where is that? Yeah, there are some temples where they have these gigantic deities, like of Lord Chaitanya. So one place like that is Vancouver, if I'm not mistaken. There's a large deity of Lord Chaitanya outside. And I told them up there, I said, look, as long as you have Lord Chaitanya outside, without any covering, you're never going to be able to build a new temple. And they still haven't been. And I said that 20 years ago. And so even up to today, they have never been able to build a new temple, right? Because they're committing an aparad. You don't keep a statue of Lord Chaitanya uh, outside. It has to be protected. It can't just be outside in the, let's say, exposed to all the elements, cold and heat and rain, so forth, And but they didn't listen to me. And after 20 years, they still haven't built a new temple in there. Why? Because they don't listen. Right? You don't keep a deity outside. It's not, it can be a statue or something, but not Krishna. You want to make a statue of Gandhi? Okay, you can put it outside. But you can't put Krishna outside like that. That's exposed to all the elements all year round. That actually that happens because people don't listen. And even now, I mean, they've been talking about building a temple in Vancouver, like they're building a new temple building for, I don't know, 30 years now. Have they built a new temple? No. And I told them 25 years ago, I said, until you take down this, Murti of Lord Chaitanya that you have outside, you're not going to be able to build a new temple. Have they built a new temple? No, they haven't built a new temple. So it's very sad because they have so much land and they can do so many nice things there. And they do some nice things, no doubt about it. But they, for some reason or other, they never took down the deity of Lord Chaitanya that's outside every day of the year. And they had never put anything, I never saw this, maybe they did now, but they never put anything to cover it from the rain and so forth.
It's huge.
Yeah.
It's very tall.
Yeah. And I told them this. I told them this 25 years ago. I said, look, until you take down this deity of Lord Chaitanya, you're not going to be able to build a new temple. Fast forward 25 years, they still haven't built their new temple. They've been talking about it for 25 years, but they haven't been able to do it. Okay. So I think we're finished. Are there any questions or comments? Yay. Yeah. So yesterday was a lot of fun. I went to the beach and we preached, and Radhika was there. She was a big celebrity there. Everyone was her. They were surprised to see a cow on the beach. Okay, so I think we'll stop right there. And
We'll continue with this verse again.
which is what, 43? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I want to talk about cause and effect.
Yeah.
We'll start tomorrow. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Please chant Hare Krishna and be happy. Okay, very good. How many rounds did you chant yesterday? Excellent. Not only you're happy, I'm also happy because you chant every round. And people, please chant 7 rounds again today. Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna Mahamantra ki jai. Gaur Premanand.